here. All right, we're going to get started. We're going to start with introductions. We're going to start with our host, Glenn.
Glen Neck, Seon Township, the promised land.
Howard Bauman, Fort Sheldon Township.
And Ken DeWeer, Fillmore Township.
Kevin Kleinstra, City of Zeeland.
John Lanham, MDOT. Hopefully some of you remember me. I know I haven't been here for 2 or 3 months, but I'm back. I thought I'd better show up in case you were deciding to, going to decide to check me off the list or your committee or something. Anyway, sorry.
They still got your name tag, John.
Yeah. Thank you, Carolyn.
Steve Boltheis, Executive Director of the MACC.
David Vangenhoven at large.
Nancy DeBoer, City of Holland.
Russ DeSalle with the MACC Authority Board.
Tom Bird, Ottawa Road Commission.
Jerry Hunsberger, Park Township.
Terry Hoffmeyer, Laketown Township.
Thank you. And
Melissa Hookwater with the MACC. Carolyn Alston with the MACC.
Rob Bank with the MACC. Steve Rutman, MDOT, Grand Region.
Kelly Goward with the MACC.
thank you very much. Well, this is kind of a monumental one, isn't it?
Yes,
All right.
indeed.
All right, Steve, let's go through the bylaws.
All right. So 2 things probably before that. One, I had a chance to visit with Hannes Myers recently, and I'm pleased to report about a year ago, I had informed all of you that Hannes had entered into hospice care, and went and visited with him last month, and he announced to me that he has graduated from hospice care. So his health condition has improved to the point where he's been moved from palliative care and is now working on a set of goals that include increasing his ambulatory abilities. And I'll tell you, folks, those of you who were here at the meeting, the last time he attended a meeting, it happened to be over at Holland City Hall. We were up in your second floor study room, and Hannes came in that day. He looks great in comparison to that day. You know, he seems to be doing really well, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that you may see him at this table again. But in the event that that doesn't happen, I have this card, and if you'd be willing to sign it and just send along your well wishes. So I have that good news to report. And then the minutes.
Oh, yes, all right, minutes. If we could have a motion for the minutes, please.
So we have
Support that.
Okay. All's in favor, say aye. 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 Okay. All right, sorry. Back to bylaws.
So, if you had a chance to take a look at the bylaws, clause, I think it's 12, note that clause number 12 notes that it requires a 2/3 vote by this board in order to approve the bylaws. So 2/3 of 18 is 12, and I'm counting 11 right now. So we can talk about them but I don't believe we have 12. We don't have the sufficient number to act on the bylaws today unless someone else shows up. So, because it does require 2/3 of the board, and we're at 18 right now, so we need a 12th member in order to take action. So, given that fact, do you want to just proceed and take a look at them? We did that briefly at our March 9 meeting. I could walk you through, we kind of had a first reading and review of them March 9. Nothing's changed. The intent was to take action, but we're one shy of being able to do that. So possibly, if you've had an opportunity to look at them a little bit more since the March 9 meeting, I can certainly respond to any questions. I can quickly give you an overview regarding them again, but at this point, we're not going to be able to take action on them. So what is your pleasure in that regard?
Why don't we just move on with our regular agenda? If we have a 12th person show up, we can go back and redo it, but if we do not end up with 12, we'll just end up discussing it next month.
Everybody okay with that?
Okay.
All right, Steve. We're going to move on into transportation. And Elisa.
Oopsie. I think I tripped on a cord over here and just resetting it a moment. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to begin with just a greeting to all of you and let you know that we've had some special meetings this last month for our Transportation Technical Committee, one of which was Friday. We had a special meeting specifically to talk about the Emergency Access Project, which is currently in the TIP. And I did want to just give you a quick update on what the decision was by the technical committee. So before you, we've put a memorandum which summarizes the various items that Mr. Meshkin has been busy working on, and he did provide an update on the many approvals that have been received. Break-in access requirement had been accepted and approved, environmental review. And so this is something that I'm going to provide just some background on the discussion, and then I wanted to let you know what the action was of the technical committee. So basically, the focus of our attention right now is on the August bid letting. That's an important date in order to obligate projects and not lose the opportunity to use federal funds. We need to make sure that our projects are obligated by that date. So that in mind, there were a number of steps that Mr. Meshkin was explaining. Several permits have to be applied for. One is an MDEQ permit. Another is the State Historic Preservation Office, which is commonly known as SHPO. So that's another permit that needs to be obtained. And then a series of memorandums of understanding. So one of those would be with the Michigan Department of Transportation, and a second one would be with the Allegan County Road Commission. And in addition to that, the members of the technical committee advised that the grade inspection be scheduled as quickly as possible and should occur by mid-April. So the reason I want to bring this to your attention today is, again, to remind you of that August bid letting. And the technical committee did decide that it would extend the time for this project. Obviously, a great deal has been invested in the project itself. And so with that in mind, the technical committee is going to wait until the May 14th meeting. And if the project is proceeding and is on schedule, it will continue on. But an alternate project was identified, and that's the 64th Street project that's in the memorandum. It's currently in the TIP, which makes it much easier because it's already gone through the public review. And basically what would happen is that project would advance to fiscal year 18, and if that does happen, please save the date on your calendar. That would require a special meeting of the policy board on May 21st. So this is Plan B that's been put in place, but hopefully Plan A will proceed as is scheduled. So that's kind of about an hour summarized in about 5 minutes. So does anyone have any questions regarding the memo or any of the items that I just explained?
Terry, I know you were at the tech meeting on Friday. Did that pretty well capture the conversation?
Captures it. We're happy. And we're going to continue to work on it. If for whatever reason it falls by the wayside, it'll be good to see some additional work being done within Laketown Township, and we would look forward to next year. But yes, perfect. Appreciate it.
Great. All right. All right, well, the second item that I have for you is, that was the tip update. And we did have a slide for you as well, in case there were any questions. I think this is important to acknowledge this location right, I believe it's right here through this property. That would be the access point, so. Anything else on the property itself? It's helpful to have a location just to reference it. Okay. Next on the agenda is a memorandum of understanding. And it's a long document. I provided to you the draft, which is colored so that you'd have an idea of what the language is. I'll boil it down for you. Basically, we have a memorandum of understanding that basically says that the MACC will honor federal regulations and we will incorporate performance-based planning into our transportation planning process. That's, in a nutshell, what we're doing. So there are a number of steps involved in that memorandum of understanding, so I'm going to walk through them very quickly for you. And there are, I believe, 12 different articles. The first of which is that we acknowledge that our decision-making process is focused on performance-based factors. So, we've done that all along. We've been hearing a great deal about performance-based planning. So this is something that we've already been working towards. Second item here relates to the bylaws, which we'll be approving next month. And that is the MPO structure and planning boundaries are laid out in this document. The third is the Unified Work Program, and you will actually see an outline for the UWP next month, and we will be approving it June 4th. That lays out all the tasks that the transportation program works on during the year. So this is something that's standard within our MOU, but it's important for you as well to see, and that's why I'm walking through all the elements so that you're familiar with what we're tasked with before we begin reviewing our UWP, is what we commonly call it. Public participation plan is another element that's important, and we revisit that when we update our long-range transportation plan, which Carolyn and I have been working on a timeline, and you'll be seeing that shortly. So this is all pretty consistent with what we've been doing. A documented consultation process. You know that when we reach out to the community on our plans, we have a set of pretty strict requirements about how we inform the public and document that we have done that. So that's also included in the MOU. And then a few other items that the MOU addresses: planning studies and projects, how they are to be completed; air quality conformity, which I'm sure you know does impact transportation planning considerably if we have to add that to our schedule to make sure our plan conforms and doesn't add emissions. And then the travel demand forecasting process. Our tech committee has been busy. Each local unit of government has been reviewing socioeconomic data and helping us to make sure that our model has as much data as it needs to run accurately. All right, and a few other items that are in that document. The long-range transportation plan must be fiscally constrained, and that's something that the Federal Highway Administration pays close attention to make sure that the dollars we anticipate for revenue, that we are programming within those dollars and not exceeding that. So the TIP document we've talked about just earlier. The annual list of federally obligated projects you hear from MACC staff every year when we give you a list of how many federal dollars have been allocated in our region. And then lastly, Article 12 adds performance-based planning, and this is something that you will see when we talk about the TIP document and how we're going to revise it. We are proposing that it be revised to address the targets, data sharing, and reporting. So that is the document that was provided to you. Basically, we just need, it's an action item, and there is a requirement that the MOU be established with the Michigan Department of Transportation as well as our transit partner, the MACC, and that needs to be approved by the May deadline. We're providing it to you now so that we've got that in place. Are there any questions? Yes.
Lisa, I note there are additional reporting requirements and data gathering requirements. Do you have an idea of what that cost will be on an annual basis?
That's a very good question. You know, that is something that we can come back to and report in terms of an estimate, but it's something that we have basically just worked into our current work program. There are at least 2-hour working group meetings, 2-hour working group meetings every month that I participate in. And so that's something that I'm able to, you know, multitask and make use of that time, but that's a commitment that we've made to stay aware of what those requirements are going to be and how we're going to incorporate them into our planning process. So that's something that we can certainly calculate for you.
I guess what it was, and I think you answered it, we're not anticipating needing to use money that would have been available for road projects to cover additional expenses like consultants or outside engineering, right?
We've been doing it in-house. And I think that, you know, John Lanham is here and he has been heading up a great team through MDOT that's been working with MPOs. And so any questions I've had, I've been able to speak with John. So thankfully, that's something that MDOT laid the groundwork ahead of time. So we've been able to, you know, ask questions as we go along, revise documents, and do whatever's needed.
Yeah, it's been a common concern, obviously, and a good concern of local road agencies, but a lot of that coordination work is still being worked through, and the objective is not to have the local road agencies have to incur costs out of what could be used for their actual projects. So that's the goal of our data people who are looking at the various systems that need to be in place for these performance-based planning measures and targets. So that's the goal anyway, to minimize any expense impact upon local road agencies. So we'll have to see what eventually happens, but that's the objective.
I'd like to add that next month we'll be reviewing the list of our unified work program. One of the tasks is performance-based planning, so I can report back and let you know if there are additional hours that we anticipate. But in order to put together the budget which will be approved June 4th, we need to make sure we understand what all those tasks are. So I can give you more detail then. So, and I'll have to tell you that, you know, we are definitely trying to address all the federal regulations without spending additional time. So I've got a strategy in the next item that I'll be presenting to you so that we can amend our TIP, and then as we have additional targets that are added, we simply have to revise our appendix. So I'll be talking about that later. So makes it easier on staff, and we have fewer policy meetings that we have to bring amendments to you to address. Any other questions? All right, well, this document is an action item. And as I said, we need to have signatures for the executive director, as well as the chair, MACC board member, I believe, who will be appointed. And that's something that we'd like to finalized as quickly as we can. So,
If I may point out, you have a copy of the MOU in the packet, and there's some highlighting that is a part of that. And the highlighted portions are basically the only significant portions of the document that were revised or modified. Most of the items that Lisa discussed are items that are a part of current agreements with MPOs, so there's really not a lot of change other than in the items that are highlighted. The air quality article and the inclusion of a new article, the Article 13 at the end, that discusses performance-based planning and the measures and the targets that are to be a part of future planning by MPOs, future work activities. There were some other citational changes that were made, but those aren't highlighted necessarily.
Yes, Jerry.
I make a motion that we approve the memorandum of understanding between MACC and the Department of Transportation.
Support?
Okay, any further comments, questions? Nancy?
What's the difference between the blue and yellow, yellow highlighting?
Nothing.
Oh, all right, just the U of M comment.
Well, they are in the Final Four.
All right.
So for those of you who put away your green and white flags, I do have an extra one if you'd like to, Just kidding.
All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Back to you, Elisa.
all right. Last item I have for you is the TIP amendment. And I did want to let you know, as I alluded to earlier, we've looked at this to try and figure out a strategy so that we bring it to you today, and there will be one additional action item that we'll bring to you next month. But rather than provide an entire chapter for you to review and revise with us, we are basically just walking through a table, which you've all received, some language in the TIP document itself, which will be revised, and it's provided for you as well as in your packet. And then we are proposing an appendix, which will basically serve as a progress report. As we adopt new targets, we'll update that progress report, and it'll be a standalone document. And I think that will just make a lot more sense rather than having to bring the TIP back to you and revise it. So what I did want to walk through is some of the federal regulations that we are incorporating. We have language that does indicate that we are moving towards a performance-driven project selection process as guided by the federal regulations. And I should tell you that there is a process in place that is explained in the TIP chapter that you have in front of you. I believe it's on page 3. But it needs to be re-emphasized again to comply with the federal regs to indicate that we are looking at performance measures. And as we have new targets that are approved, we as staff will certainly do what we can to incorporate those measures. And then the other piece of this that I wanted to make sure is that we have to be able to demonstrate that we're making progress. So that's why this report card or progress report idea I think will really help us, because we'll be able to come to you periodically and present that report card to you. It's also a standalone document that can be on our website. So the last item that's on this slide right here, and this is again another regulation as part of the federal regs, that we must link our investment priorities to the performance targets. So before you, you have a table that has a list of all of our TIP projects. And a simple way to address that requirement is simply to have new fields that are on the right side. And each of those fields are the performance areas. So we will have a process in place. When a project is submitted and approved, the performance areas will also be indicated. Thankfully, for small MPOs like the MACC, we don't have to do as much as a SEMCOG or the larger TMAs. So I think this is a strategy that Federal Highways is pleased with, and I know that MDOT has certainly presented this as an option. So we are bringing it to you today for incorporation into our TIP document so that we've got that in place. All right. So basically the changes that we're recommending to you today, and this is also an action item, 3 things. One is the table that I presented. 2 is the revisions to the TIP document, and pages 3 and 36 incorporate the language that's required. And then the last item is this report card, which we'll bring back to you next month. And that will go into great detail about what the targets are and the measures. So far, we've only have 1 target that's been officially approved, and that's for safety. But you'll see in a moment that we have quite a few more that are coming. So we're getting ready. We want to have everything in place so they can easily be incorporated. Any questions?
Are the transportation performance criteria strictly numbers of cars and speed of cars getting where they need to go?
So what I can do is, not necessarily. Some of the factors we're looking at, this table that's been put before you, lists the required targets.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So pavement and bridge condition, that's one of the federal requirements. And we have the final rules that we must now abide by. System performance is another, so that will certainly be an opportunity to look at the various modes of transportation. Highway asset management and transit asset management. So these are the various measures that we'll be dealing with. And I'll talk to you about the dates in my next slide. Any other questions?
And you need a motion on this as well?
We do.
Okay. Need a motion, please. Thank you, Terry. Thank you. Russ, any further questions?
I guess I can make a comment,
Thank you,
Mr.
John.
Bohr, regarding your question. Is many of these measures, they do have quantified targets associated with them, at least the state does. But as far as the NPOs are concerned, it's not really necessary to have to establish a analytical process that details measures for the urbanized area. In other words, what Elisa is doing is with the TIP projects, she's just including columns for the measures where a check mark, if you will, can be placed to associate each project with a certain performance measure. So you don't have to necessarily put a quantifiable number in the cell, in the row for the performance measure. So it's basically sort of a they're asking just basically for a kind of a good faith effort in the association of your projects with the performance measures, and not necessarily that you have to do an in-depth or establish an in-depth analysis process that will result in each individual area or agency doing analytical work to establish target parameters themselves. So it's.
So you're saying it just needs to be reviewed but not graded?
Well, it just needs to be graded, but not necessarily. You don't have to establish. Yeah, if the state establishes a target of 1.2 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles of travel, it's not that the individual agency has to establish its own target of 1.4 or 1.0. It's just that you just simply say that these projects, these certain projects that we're doing that have a safety-related positive impact, you just indicate that that is the case with certain projects, and that you've considered safety, let's say, when you selected certain projects. You don't have to come up necessarily with your own quantitative measure, let's say.
As an example, the Cabell Drive improvements the goal there is to improve safety at that intersection by realigning the road there. So that obviously would go into the safety category as one of the benefits that we're looking for in that project. And that would then contribute to the state's goal of improving safety, and hopefully the state then will see a reduction overall in traffic fatalities. But we don't need to actually measure at that intersection these analytical results of that effort.
Yes, right. You do not have to do that.
So we are asked to indicate progress and simply listing those projects in the report card and being able to demonstrate that we're linking our investments to the targets. So we have a dollar figure for that project. We can say we're X number of dollars are being spent in fiscal year 18 or 19 to address safety. So yeah, so I think this will work. You know, I think initially when we were told performance-based planning, it sounded like a huge task. And while it has taken a lot of time to understand what's required, I think what you have before you is something that's very doable for a small MPO. So.
At least it's used in judging the project then pre-construction, is that right?
Well, there's a call for projects, and during that time, staff review everything that's submitted, and we do have a list of criteria. So safety, obviously, being one of our first targets approved, will be one of the factors we look at. But ultimately, we will have criteria that address all of the targets that are in this table, and our report card will get longer. So right now, thankfully, we only have one target to be able to report on, but a year from now, that report card will be a bit longer. So,
Well, but it's workable, I think, for all of the MPOs. Safety is always a major criteria in project selection anyway. So, and that's with all the MPOs. And all the other criteria are somewhat related. In other words, if you have a criteria of congestion, of reducing congestion as a criteria for project selection, well, that goes along with the system reliability. That's what system reliability in this measure is, basically. If pavement condition is one of your criteria, and obviously it is for almost all MPOs, so that's also, pavement condition is one of the measures. So, well, most of these are already built into your project selection criteria anyway.
What about intermodal? Does safety involve pedestrian and bike safety, or is it strictly car, truck?
Well, transit is one of the measures, but in terms of, an MPO can also set their own measures and project selection criteria for safety. For instance, our targets are all related to fatalities and injuries, but other MPOs, they have safety targets related to non-motorized, pedestrian. Those are criteria that they also include in their planning procedures and into their project selection process. So you're certainly free to embellish the measures and targets as you see fit. So
you may recall that we had a lot of number crunching that we were working on last fall for safety, and we did look at non-motorized collisions. So that's something that we already have done in the background and we'll look at year to year. So in the end, we decided to adopt or to support the state target for non-motorized collisions to reduce those, but we'll revisit that annually.
yeah, and the embellishment or the improvement of non-motorized transportation is a part of the long-range plan document, planning factors that each MPO must consider. So it is something that needs to be spoken to and addressed in planning documents of the MPO. So.
Thank you, John. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Are you still up for a little bit more?
Just for a moment more, and that is
You're doing good. Keep going.
the table that you see before you is also at your place setting. And I wanted to just let you know this is our list of dates that we must comply with. I basically just took the table that was provided and I just have the dates for the MPO action. So you will see safety. We adopted our target. We made a decision as an organization in January, so that's done. And now it needs to be incorporated by May. You'll see that in the report card next month. Pavement and bridge, the target needs to be adopted in November, by November 16th, and as well as for system performance. So next fall, you'll get to hear lots about pavement, bridges, and system performance. And those need to be incorporated by May of 19. And then lastly, highway asset management and transit asset management. Input coordination is basically what's being requested at this point for highways. For transit asset management, MACC staff has already shared with us their target for the transit asset management. So I put a check by that because we already have that. We simply need to incorporate it since we work closely with MACC as a partner. So that's basically what we're working with, but I thought it was important so that you're aware, especially before we finalize our unified work program, which will be happening at the June 4 meeting. I thought it was important that you be aware of each of the steps that we need to make sure we incorporate. So if no one has any other questions, this is the last slide that I had, and I just wanted to make sure you had this information. Okay.
Lisa, thank you. All right. That was a lot of information. John, it's good to have you here. Timely.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so
I thought I'd venture back to the west side now that it's the end of March or so.
we noticed it. We noticed it. We didn't talk about it, but we noticed it. Any comments you want to bring us?
No, not other than along with what Lisa just presented. So that's a big effort on the department's part, is doing what's necessary to comply with these performance measure regulations. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm a part of a team that's working on working with the MPOs to comply with the regulations, but we have the department has a team for each of those other measures as well, trying to incorporate the performance measures and targets into our own processes. So we're as much on the hook as you all are. So.
Well, it's always good to have you here, John. Welcome to, as Glenn would say, the promised land here, so good to be here. Kelly.
All right. So what I'm going to present today is kind of a summary of this Phase 2 report from our Regional Prosperity Initiative Watershed or Sustainable Watershed Funding Study. There were some copies on the back table there. I think I have 10, so there's not enough for everybody, but I'm pretty much just going to summarize how this document was compiled, kind of the background work that went into it, and then just kind of give you the highlights of what's in here as we look to move this project forward. So this presentation, the slides that I'm going to present to you today, were presented to what we call our West Michigan Watershed Collaborative, which is a group within the 13-county area of all the watersheds in the region. I think we've identified over 30 different watersheds and active watershed groups. So again, I want to acknowledge public sector consultants put this study together. John Baird from their office put these slides together. So these are pretty much his slides. I've modified them slightly, but so this was presented to the group in January. So kind of a little bit of the background of how this report came to be established. If you'll recall, we had a phase 1 report that was completed, oh boy, was that last October? That outlined 4 possible funding mechanisms for funding watershed management plan implementation. So with the second phase of the project, we wanted to go in depth and discuss all 4 of those. And I've got a slide later that tells you those 4 mechanisms as a reminder. So in order to do that, we wanted to have some smaller focused discussions. So we held roundtable discussions throughout West Michigan. There were 6 locations, 45 participants. And again, this was mostly our watershed partners. We invited a few other kind of key stakeholders that participate in specific watersheds. And so I thought that was really great participation over 6 meetings. And then we brought everybody together in August. This was August 29 of last year, 2017, to kind of report out what had happened at these roundtables and then build consensus around one approach to move forward. So this was kind of the process that occurred at these roundtable meetings. The purpose of them was to really get together and discuss everyone's kind of views and perceptions of current funding models. How are we currently funding watershed management plan implementation, and is that working? What are some strategies we can look at to move the whole region forward? And then these are the 4 funding approaches that were studied in the phase 1. So we went through each one of these kind of in depth and kind of got kind of thoughts and opinions from everybody at the round table in terms of what would be the positives or negatives, challenges, opportunities with each of these mechanisms. And then we also wanted to make sure we got information from everybody in terms of what else do we need to know before we move this forward. So just kind of some basic outcomes of these meetings, some themes that were apparent across all of the conversations. Is there was certainly agreement that we need new funding approaches. What we're doing now is not working because it's competitive and we don't have consistent funding. It's mostly grants that fund the work that we do. Partners from across the entire region want to continue to work together. We feel like we've got some momentum working together. It's a lot of people, a lot of partners, but we play well together. And so there was a feeling that we want to continue to do that. And primarily because we're collaborating, that enhances our decision-making process. We're in this together. We can have better outcomes if we're supporting one another. Some of these mechanisms required legislation in order to be moved forward. And so again, there was a general consensus that that was not a barrier, that if we needed to pursue legislation, that we should do that and not put an option off the table because it requires legislation. And then certainly everyone agreed there's a lot more work that we have to do, a lot more information that's needed. So at our consensus building meeting in August, we discussed the results of the community conversations, and then public sector consultants put together a preliminary funding framework, which is really what's summarized in this, and we'll go over that next. So we presented the framework to them and then wanted to get their feedback on, okay, this is the model we're proposing to move forward. What do you think about this? What are the things we still need to consider? And so we got some really good discussion out of that. So here's really the framework for this, the funding mechanism that came out of these roundtable discussions. So it's not one of the 4 original ones, it's kind of a hybrid. So what we landed on was a voluntary watershed contribution with a watershed-based decision-making structure. So the 4 initial methodologies were a millage, a flat fee assessment, which is kind of the closest thing to this voluntary watershed contribution. Although it would be a flat fee that you could opt into or opt out of, it would not be mandatory. And then there was also watershed assessment districts. So this watershed-based decision-making structure comes from that watershed assessment district part of the model. So it's kind of taking a flat fee, making it voluntary, but putting it with the decision-making structure that comes with that watershed management districts. This would require new legislation to enable the collection of that voluntary fee. There's no existing legislation that would allow that. And then we also talked a lot about how it's really important that if we're going to seek legislation, it can't just work for our region, it's got to work statewide. This needs to enable counties across the state, watersheds across the state to enact the same voluntary contribution. So this is just kind of continuing that. We talked a lot about you can end up with a one-size-fits-all, but then is it a one-size-fits-none? So we don't want to be too prescriptive in the legislation, because Michigan's regions vary significantly. We've got, political differences, we've got geographic differences, topography, water quality issues when we're talking Lake Erie versus Lake Michigan. So it's pretty complex. So we want to try to make it as adaptable as possible to the region so that it's more likely to be implemented. So here's some of the key things that would be within the legislation. The next slide puts this in kind of a graphic form. And I guess not necessarily the legislation, but just of the approach itself. Some of this would be in the legislation, some may not be. But it would really start with the counties, enabling the counties to collect that voluntary fee through the property tax bill. We figured that's an existing mechanism through which other fees are collected, millages, things like that. So it would just kind of be a natural fit to continue to do that through property tax bills. There would need to be some kind of structure for the county that's collecting that fee to pass it on to a regional planning body, assuming that we are going to handle this within our regional prosperity initiative regions. And then within that region, that regional planning body, like our regional planning organizations, the West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission, there are organizations like that for the entire state. They would work with advisory councils to help them allocate the funding out to the watershed groups. And then one key thing that was discussed is that this would need to allow regional planning organizations to enter into cooperative agreements with one another because some of those regional planning organizations don't have the capacity or don't have the staff currently to be able to take on a new project like this. And that happens with other programs at the regional planning organizations as well. So here's, again, kind of a graphic representation of how the money would flow. So the contributions are collected by the county. They pass it on to that regional planning organization, watershed advisory council, or it may be multiple councils. So within our region, we've got Muskegon, White Lake, Grand River, Macatawa River, Kalamazoo. We may have advisory councils for each of those watersheds. And that's where that watershed-based decision-making structure comes in. But so there's a lot of details, a lot of questions in here to work out. But eventually then the regional planning organization would be the ones cutting the check to whatever watershed organization is receiving the funding. Any questions about how that framework?
Kelly, if the contributions are coming from property tax bills and from the county, so the money that we would collect in Ottawa County would go for Ottawa County projects, or would that be a region-wide thing?
So that is a big thing that we've been discussing, and that's where we don't want it to be overly prescriptive. We would figure out what's going to work best for our region. So that's where these advisory councils would have a really important role to figure out, do we do that? Do we keep the money in the county it's collected in? Do we keep the money within the watershed it's collected in? Or do we pool it at the whole region? So we have not answered that question yet. We have a lot of opinions from our watershed stakeholders, but we have not landed on, we want to do it this way in our region. But yeah.
So do they have an idea, do they have a target of how much money they want to raise for this?
We do. Through the first phase of the project, we surveyed all of the watershed groups to get, what realistically is your annual budget need. And we came up with a figure somewhere around $12 million a year. for the whole region. So that's a lot of funding. And that's a big question here. If this is a voluntary contribution, what can we expect will be donated by people out of the goodness of their hearts? So there's a lot of further study that needs to be done there before we can really make some revenue projections on this. And this is where a lot of our current conversations with stakeholders are, answering those kinds of questions. And there's a lot of detail in here that's not within the report. We need to figure out how this would work for our region. Yeah.
Did you include conversations with municipalities and county treasurers to see if they are willing and able to take voluntary contributions as part of a tax bill?
So not within the entire region. So the West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission, they have talked to all 5 of their counties, and they all were very supportive, at a surface level. They didn't kind of dive into the details of this. And we do have Muskegon, a representative from Muskegon County has been participating in this. That's kind of our next step, and I've got that on a slide coming up. As far as we have had a lot of conversations with the same group of watershed stakeholders, we need to take it to other key stakeholders in terms of who might be involved in this process. And certainly the municipalities are pretty high on that list of who we need to talk to next. The municipalities, the legislators we want to get behind this sort of thing, the regional planning organizations, we want to start talking to some of those folks from outside of our region. So we have more of a statewide support for the legislations once we move that forward. So, there's been minimal conversations, but we certainly need to have more of those.
Who's the regional body? Do we know who that is yet, or how it would be comprised?
Right. Well, with this particular model, we really were looking at the regional planning organizations that are designated just like metropolitan planning organizations are.
So the taxes would come into this organization from Ottawa, Allegan, and be distributed in that same region?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So here's some of the details that we've talked about a little bit in terms of this is where it's customizable for what works with the region. Should it be an opt-in or an opt-out system? There's positives and negatives of both of those. The region would determine if they're going to put a cap on the voluntary contribution, which I don't know why you'd want to cap that. Let people give as much as they want to, right? And then determine if there's going to be a cap on administrative expenses. Is the county going to take a cut of that money? Is the regional planning organization going to take a cut of that money? So the region would make that determination for itself. And then deciding how do they allocate the funds, like Kevin had mentioned. Does it stay in the county it's collected in? Does it go outside of the county and stay within the region? So the region would make that decision. Deciding what projects or what other expenses the money would be used for would be up to that region if they want to just allocate it to on-the-ground projects versus covering the whole gamut of what we need, staffing and outreach and education. And so the region would decide that. And then also the scale at which to allocate funding. And I've got a map here to kind of illustrate what we mean by scale. So these show our kind of the biggest scale of the watersheds. We call this, they're 8-digit watersheds. Watersheds all have a numeric code. And so these are kind of, this is at the biggest scale. But all of these can be broken down into smaller watersheds. That's a little blurry, and this isn't even as detailed as it can be. Like the Kalamazoo River hasn't been divided out, and it can be. The same thing with the Muskegon, but you can see here in the Lower Grand, like this is very complicated. So at what level do you give the Lower Grand money, or do you give each one of these individual sub-watersheds funding? Because a lot of these have active projects, they have groups that work specifically in that watershed. So the region would have a lot of tough decisions to make about how do we allocate this funding. So the implementation strategy, I think this is pretty much exactly out of the executive summary has this. I think that was in your packet. We, working with public sector consultants, took their implementation strategy recommendations and kind of grouped them into 3 phases that we thought would make sense moving forward. That really the initial steps is we need more funding to support our work at this. Right now we have some funding remaining from the Regional Prosperity Initiative that was awarded by the West Michigan Prosperity Alliance to fund our work with the Grand Valley Metro Council and West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission. Their staff gets some funding out of that. I don't know that we've budgeted out. We've got maybe a few more months on that. So we need to look for more money to keep staff able to work on this. We need to continue to engage key stakeholders. So some of those we mentioned, like the municipalities that would play a role in this, and then the legislators. And then we've also talked about some of these statewide organizations like League for Conservation Voters and Michigan Environmental Coalition, some of those kind of statewide organizations that would potentially play a role in helping perhaps lobby for legislation. And then we need a communication strategy for how are we going to reach out to these stakeholders, what message are we going to take to them. So what we did at the January meeting is we gave all of the participants at that meeting a little postcard to indicate which one of these do you want to help us with. And everybody filled out a postcard and indicated they were willing to help with one of these activities. So we have not, since January, our planning team kind of decided to take a little step backward and continue to meet with the watershed groups to work out some of the details, talk about some of these questions about if the legislation is passed and we have money, how are we going to allocate it? So we're really working on that right now, but we have a whole list of watershed stakeholders throughout the region that are ready as soon as we make a phone call to help us do these things, to help look for funding, to help talk to stakeholders and help develop that message that we're going to put out there. So this was kind of our plan, our kind of short-term plan. We want to work on those elements the next year or so. And then we've got some other steps here. You know, the next phase, we might refine the strategy. This might not be what it actually looks like. Once we talk to stakeholders, we want to do some evaluation on what caps might be, some of those dollar values, on the administrative expenses, and then also looking at participation rates. What kind of participation rates could we expect within the regions? Maybe doing some public opinion surveys, so then we can get those revenue projections.
What's that?
And then kind of the third phase would be more of we want to get this legislation in place and educate the public so that we get them to buy into the project. So within the document, there's really just this outline. There's not the detail of how we would do this, but that would be the role that the MACC and the Metropolitan Council and Shoreline would play as the kind of the planning team on this. We would detail out the strategy of how to move this forward. So just kind of currently what we're doing, I'd mentioned that we're continuing conversations with our watershed partners. We wanted to take a step back before we go to this, our additional stakeholders, so we can kind of detail out this process so that when we talk to county commissioners or township trustees, when they start asking us questions, well, how are you going to allocate the funding? We've got some answers for them. So we're meeting with our watershed partners. We had some meetings last week. There's some meetings this week, and we're actually looking at the TIP planning model as a way to take care of this step, where there'd be some kind of call for projects. Watersheds would submit those. Staff would put them together on a spreadsheet for the advisory councils to look at, and we'd determine, you know, some kind of criteria that the projects could be ranked and scheduled over a 3 or 4 year period. So we've been proposing that to our group of our watershed collaborative partners and getting their feedback on, do you think this is a good model to follow? With some modifications, of course. But so that seems to be getting positive support so far. And then, so once we have kind of some kind of consensus on, all right, this is the model we want to follow, then we'll start working on, we got to get some funds, we got to reach out to the other stakeholders, and then develop this communication strategy. So in the meantime, we are committed to, you know, facilitating this process as best we can, provided we have some more, we can secure some additional funding to support our staff effort on this. So any questions about that? It's kind of a complicated thing to put in a nutshell, but.
Thank you, Kelly. That's it's well done. There's a lot to that, so thank you.
And we do have, the report is online. If you don't want to take a hard copy, we put a new page under the watershed section of the website that has all of the information from this project from the start.
All right, thank you. Steve, you could talk to us about budget one more time.
Yes, indeed. Included in your agenda packet was the second amendment to the budget for FY18. If you had a chance to take a look at it, it's fairly minor stuff. I mean, I just wanted, I guess mostly psychologically, just clean these things up before I head out the door. So it's not major stuff. If you had a chance to look at it, the amendment indicates the areas where we're proposing some changes. The first couple are under line items 40 and 41. So as I refer to line items, it's that column on the far left of the amendment there. We working with partners on different things, and as partners send us revenue for those activities, we need a place in the budget to place them. So that's what's happening in lines 40 and 41, where we're getting payments from various partners for watershed work and for the Ian Lockwood series. So that's what's happening with that $1,000 and $7,000 dollar amendments on the revenue side, lines 40 and 41. And so that's the extent of the revenue changes for $8,000. And then on the expense side, line 89, contractual consulting for indirect. The search committee, who's going to be working on the director search, thought that their costs could be covered with an additional $2,500, so that has been noted there under line 88. And then you may recall in the first amendment back in November, we had moved $25,000 in general fund dollars to support the community enhancement program. That was done on line 11 to round out that 62. 932, and then that's just a pass-through on line 64. You see the Community Enhancement Board expending all those funds. But Chris had said, well, you know, since that's a general fund transfer, we need to expense that somewhere. And the auditors are going to want to see that, you know, the board authorized that expenditure from the general fund. So a new line item you see in line 105 there is that transfer for that expenditure from the general fund. That's all I'm proposing for budget amendment number 2. Be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, a motion to approve budget amendment number 2 as presented would be appreciated. Moved by Howard? Glenn?
Yeah.
Supported by Kevin.
Okay, any further questions? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And a budget summary or update.
Yes, indeed. So we are putting together the budget for fiscal year 19, and typically what I do with this at the March meetings, I'll talk to you about what some are the themes that I see, some of the factors influence the development of the next budget, and then typically in April, we'll either have a first reading or a 90% complete budget, and then as Elisa mentioned in her report, we'll be bringing the proposed 19 budget to you for your consideration at the June 4 meeting. So I have certainly been working on the 19 budget and certainly want to make you aware of a few factors that are impacting it, and it's on the slide here. You may recall that when we were working on the bylaws and a member agreement back in the fall of 16, I had said, hey, you know, I'd proposed raising the cap. The member agreement says right now that membership dues are capped at $1 per capita. And we had some conversation at that time saying, hey, I think we're certainly fine for 17, and I thought 18 was going to come out in okay, but at 19 I said, you know, we might be facing some headwinds, and we had some conversation around that. You decided not to raise the cap at that time, and we looked at some other opportunities through, you know, an inflationary adjustment and so forth. Well, that projection does continue to hold true as I look at FY19. There are a number of grants that are going to be ending, and they're listed up there. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative has been a great grant for us. It provides funding to Rob for going out to farmers for incentive payments. It also provided funding for staffing. That grant was 3 years, and during FY19, before the end of FY19, that grant is going to end. So at least the staffing portion that we can use and access for staffing costs will end. So that's certainly one that's ending. Transit access and connectivity was a grant focused on one effort. That will be ending by FY19. We've received several allocations for staffing support through the West Michigan Prosperity Initiative. We may get that, the West Michigan Prosperity Alliance. We may get that again, but I'm not planning on it for FY19, so that will end as well. And then those particular grant endings are forces largely external to the organization over which we have no control. The last one, no funding for the Clean Air Action Program in FY19, is something that came about from our own doing as we were putting together the current TIP. And historically, the MACC has received roughly 30 grand a year for the Clean Air Action Program, and we use a portion of that funding for staffing support. So as we're putting together the current TIP, just how things shook out and what projects were being funded with CMAQ and so forth, it ended up that this fiscal year and the previous fiscal year, we got larger than typical allocations to the CMAQ funding, about double. We landed about 60 grand each year in 17 and 18. So the committee at that time said, hey, Bolt Ice, you know, you're taking a pretty big chunk in 17 and 18. How about you pay us back and kind of even it out from a historical perspective in 19? And I said, fine, that seems fair. And, you know, we'll put our stores in the barn and we'll draw upon them when needed. So staff went forward, used that additional funding to buy extra promotional materials and so forth over their fiscal years. So we do have stores in the barn. But for 19, there's not going to be that funding available for staffing support. So we have to find another way to do that. So as a result of all these factors I just mentioned, as I'm roughing in the budget, I'm projecting that we're going to have a deficit of about 50,000 is the number I see right now. Now there are a number of assumptions in terms of staffing levels and so forth. That deficit projection is based on staffing at the current staffing level, bringing in a new executive director at the lower end of the salary range that the job is going to be posted at. So there are a number of assumptions that have gone into that number that could make it go up and down depending on where things end. So that 50,000 deficit, you know, is less than 10% of our budget. And I just wanted to make you aware of that indeed the headwinds that were predicted are coming in a little bit at this point. And I wanted to make you certainly aware of that. As you'll see in the last note on the slide up there, my recommendation is, and I would strongly urge you, do not take your foot off the gas. I mean, there is a lot of momentum going on programmatically at this point, and my encouragement and recommendation to you is to continue on as is in this year of transition and putting this budget together and access the reserves to cover the deficit. We have a very healthy reserve, as the slide indicates. You know, we got about $934,000 in unassigned fund balance. Now, that's of course what the audit tells us. Remember, that's also what's in our checking account. So I like to leave, you know, roughly 200 grand for working capital, but there's still a reserve there. That's the reason I've built it over these years, for a situation just like the one we potentially are going to be facing here. So my recommendation is just to access that, keep the foot on the gas, and keep the programming going, at least for this year of transition, and take a look at how things go. Grant droughts come and go. We had one back in 2004. I went back and looked in the archives, and so, you know, it appears that we're facing one again right now, and we have a fund reserve to help ride it out. So I just wanted to give you that kind of overview as to what's happening with 19, and of course, wish you all the best in putting that all together. But the resources are there to take care of it.
Comments? Steve, I'm just going to ask a question. I know the answer, but you've had a discussion with Chris. In his opinion, the fund balance is healthy?
Yes. So some of you who have a little longer tenure on the board may recall Ed Marcial used to be the representative for Park Township. Every year during the audit report, Ed would ask, what's our fund balance? And Mark Veenstra would tell him, we were with DeBoer and Bauman back then, he would tell him, and Ed always asked the question. Would ask the group the question, or mostly the auditor, what is a sufficient fund balance for an organization like the MACC? And Mark always used to answer, the organization is primarily a grant-funded organization. Not that your dues are not important, because if we don't have the dues, we can't get the grants. So they're important. But the majority of the funding comes from grants. And grants come and go. There's some fluidity with that. So Mark always encouraged the board to carry at least a year's worth of operating in reserve. So that was always his response at that time. So that's always been kind of my predecessor and my objective. And, we're about $1 million shop, so we're getting pretty close to hitting that mark.
Mr. Hunsberger.
Could you pass those down around, please? I speak on behalf of the committee that was established at the meeting on March 9th, which will include Punkage, who's out of the country, Kevin Fenstra, Terry Hoffmeyer, Dave Van Ginhoven, and Jim Story, and myself. We have met as a search committee. What's coming around first to you is a posting. There's going to be a second document coming around. I want them to go around separate. I'll refer to both of them. We met as a committee, and then we've done some emailing back and forth. Certainly we've had some good support from Ottawa County HR department. The first document that came around, I kind of did some circling on it's only a 2-page document, on the front page. First I changed a couple dates because it was easier than trying to make changes, because I want to make sure everybody's okay here with this. And I've not heard back from the committee once you've seen the final documents, which was the end of last week. So I'm assuming from a committee standpoint, unless I hear something right now, I've not heard anything that we're okay. And assuming it's okay, tomorrow, March 27th, the job will be formally posted. It'll be posted for 30 days or until filled. It will go on the county website, and when it's on the county website, that page where I circled the word here, if you are on their website and clicked on that, you would get the second document that came around. Did those get around? Which is the Executive Director Recruitment Profile. This profile includes a lot of stuff that's pertinent to the MACC in this position, including job description and some other things. Recognize that the applicants are going to be required to all apply electronically through the county website. There's specific information they have to have. They'll also be allowed to put in a resume and some other information. Members of the committee will review all applications. One of the options the county had was for them to screen based on a profile or whatever we gave them, and the committee determined that we want to see all the applications. Those applications at that point of the process will not be public. From those, we will determine as a committee which ones we want to interview. And people will be told very clearly if they're going to be interviewed, it's going to be at a public meeting. So they need to deal with that if they got an existing board or employer that they need to inform. The members of the committee will each be assigned a personal code number so they can go in daily or weekly or however often as they want to review applications as they come in. We told them we want live access. We don't want to wait till 30 days are up and then look at them all. So we will, some of us might be busy and not be able to get to them for a few days, then you'll have several to look at. This is a process that we used when Jerry Felix retired and we hired Howard thing. It really worked out well. Certainly the committee will be getting back together to discuss as we get towards the end of that process. A lot of things, including, how are we going to shake this out? I suspect that we will have a number of applications. We certainly aren't going to interview everybody. The goal of the committee on your behalf is to go through this process, to narrow it down, do the public interviews, and come up with a recommendation for this committee. So any job offer would be made contingent upon a lot of things, quite frankly. A criminal background check, a drug test, certainly the approval of this committee, all of which would take place towards the end of the process for one or two finalists, but in a very short period of time. We're not going to leave people hanging for a long period of time. I think we've got the documents down. I think it looks very professional. It's very specific. We'll probably get questions that we'll have to answer as we go along. We'll get some, based on past experience that some of us have, you'll get some nervous candidates that, well, I don't really want to put my name out there because I might, Howard Fink was one of those. And it was down to Howard and one other person. And I said, well, Howard, you got to decide. Do you want to hold your breath and take the chance? Because I know what your odds are going to be if you won't be interviewed publicly. 0. Okay? And I know that that's awkward sometimes, depending on the situation that people are in. The county has also offered for finalists, and we may decide that finalists might be 2, 3, 4. I suspect it sure won't be more than that. It'd probably be less than 4, but the committee will decide that they will do testing. They have staff that's certified to do both disc and Colby testing. That we will be charged for a huge $100 per candidate. Okay, the $2,500 in the budget amendment, I suspect, will be more than substantial for the committee. The committee feels that each member of the committee has pledged that as they look at the applications, they will keep confidential who has applied. So they won't discuss it with anybody, including their spouse or people that are not on the committee. We owe that to the people who initially apply, that we have to assume that they want confidentiality. I think that pretty well covers the process. The timeline, again, it'd be a 30-day posting or until filled. So if applications came in, let's say the very early part of May, and we're still sorting through who we're going to interview, it doesn't mean we wouldn't take one of those. It states in the document, encourages people to apply ASAP if they're interested, because we're going to do a live review. We're not waiting until the deadline to start looking at things. I think we got a good committee. I think we've got a good process. We determined that the interviews will take place at the MACC offices, so candidates can see, meet staff, see the operation. Depending on where we end up, we may do a site visitation, we may not. I personally am a very big believer in that, unless you get really good, valid information. Kevin, you're going to come up with the name of the private detective or something from Grand Haven. I found that in the notes, right? The job will be posted in several professional websites and journals. We've decided at this point not to advertise in any newspapers. We are not advertising outside the state of Michigan. That doesn't mean somebody doesn't have a friend here that's going to send it to somebody in Indiana, Illinois, or someplace else. We'll certainly take applications from outside the area. We're not actively seeking them. I think as a committee, my recollection is and when I'm done here, correct me, all the things I said wrong. I think we agreed we're not going to pay any travel costs, whether it be airfare, mileage, or hotel or anything for candidates. We don't feel we need to do that. I think that pretty well covers, but help me out, folks that are on the committee.
You're good.
Questions for Jerry?
So just to be clear, it's going to be posted on the county's website, but the committee...
On the county website is the base, but then we've given them specific directions of various professional associations that we want them to actively get it to them. so that those associations, most associations have newsletters or websites or whatever. Jim Story also asked, because it's going to be on the county website in Ottawa County, that it be on the Allegan County website. Well, the reason it's starting out on the Ottawa County website is they're doing a lot of the work for us. They're very, very good at this. They have a whole system set up. And we decided to put it in newspapers. It's not a good use of money. Today, a lot of things are electronic.
But we're good to go ahead and post it on the MACC website.
Yes.
I can send it to the Michigan
We'll
Transportation.
post it on our individual websites if you were so inclined. I will be contacting the county after today's meeting. I thought it was important to make sure that we discussed here, because our committee is really working for all of you, that we're in agreement on the timeline and the process being used here. I will talk to Ottawa County yet this afternoon, unless there's a change in direction here, that everything they have right now is exactly what I handed out to you, with the exception of the change dates. We decided to wait until today, rather than get it posted at the end of last week and tell you, here's what we did. We thought it'd be important to just kind of go through and give you a heads up on the timeline and the process being used. And if anybody's got any suggestions or comments, we'd certainly be open to them.
Will that posting get to the Michigan Transportation Planners Association, the MTPA?
Yes, that's one over there.
Yeah.
Get it to Andrea so she can send it around.
There's several like that. I can't name them all off. Oh, John, I have them marked here. It's going to go Michigan Municipal League, ICMA, the Michigan Township Association, MACC, and I think the one you just named is the one that you added to the list we had here, which I don't have written down. Am I right?
You're right, yeah.
Thank you. So the answer is yes. So there's several like that. And certainly, if you have an idea of an association you belong to, that just send it to them. And everything goes through the county. None of us on the committee, and I would certainly encourage none of you, to discuss the job position. I'm listed if people have a question on the process. We went through this when we did the township position, and well, can I come in and talk to you? The answer is no. We want everybody on the committee to have equal access at the same time. Nobody's going to get a leg up or a head start. The process will be the process for everybody. I cover it? Then hearing no suggestions or changes, it will be posted tomorrow as you see it.
Jerry, you're good at this. You know what, I would say this about this group. It's kind of a group of people who get things done. I mean, you wouldn't be where you were if you didn't get things done, right? So your leadership is really very helpful. Terry, Kevin, you guys are really good.
You know, give Steve some credit. He's been burning the candle at six different ends, and he took some time to help us with a profile, because who knows the job better?
But I noticed you took out the comment in there that said, ability to leap tall buildings in a single bound. That one got taken out.
We appreciate you taking the time to help.
All right, Steve, you have a couple more items?
Yep, financial report, monthly financial report was included in your agenda packet. This is for revenues and expenditures through February. With the amendment that you just approved a little bit earlier, it cleans up a couple line items there. So that's good. Revenues stand at 53.8%. Expenses at 32.6%. Happy to answer any questions regarding the report.
Mr. Nightcamp.
Well, welcome everybody to coming over here to Zealand. We appreciate that. It's been a busy year so far. It is with everybody. Everybody's has more work than they know what to do with. But from our perspective here in the township, we've got 15 new homes that are being built already in the first 2.5 months. We've got a new subdivision down the road over here. It's called Trailside. The first phase is going to be 29 homes in it, and they called up here a couple weeks ago and said they want to get ready to start phase 2 already. Houses are going that wild. We've got 4 subdivisions actually in the township, and 3 out of the 4 are probably 80% complete, so we could use the new the new buildings that are coming out. Redwood Living is over here on 84th Avenue by Inn Academy, over here on by the highway, and that's a Redwood Living. They're rental units. There's room for 86 of them. About 65% of them are completed, and there's people moving in all the time as soon as the homes get ready at this point. So they're kind of waiting for that to continue. Hoping that'll be done probably by the midsummer for sure. So, Gentech started their new building, 260,000 square feet. Just started that here a couple of weeks ago. So we're looking forward to that. Over in Penatech, north side of Zeeland there by Riley Street, and there's 2 more buildings going up in there. It's a commercial subdivision. And we've got on 48th Avenue, Chicago Drive, near Hudsonville, the township, way on the east side of the township, has started the storage buildings that they're building over there. They're going to have 9 buildings, and each building will be 60 foot wide, 200 feet long, and it's basically for boat storage. In the township issues, we're in the process of starting to work on a new master plan. That'll probably take us a year at least, probably, to get it completed. It'll be just the master plan, and then also for new ordinances, or check the ordinances and stuff like that. So, and then the big one that's coming up is what's called now the Gateway, and that's Zeeland City and the township. It's our coming to the promised land area here. That's what it is, and we'll be starting that after the 4th of July. It's going to be a complete makeover of Business Loop I-196. Like I said, they'll start right after October. They hope to have all the blacktopping done, which they're going to have to, more than hope, because that's going to be about the end of October, something like that. And they want to get that all done before the plants are completed. There will still be some stuff probably that has to be completed at that point, and they're hoping that that gets done by the first of the year or so. And it's about a little over $7 million project, and we're looking forward to it. Not between now and the next year, because it's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. If you want to go to Grand Rapids, I'd suggest you go through Grand Haven or something like that, because it's going to be a better deal. So anyway, that's what's going on here with us. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming here today, and hope you have a great spring break and a very happy Easter.
Okay. We've got a couple issues before you leave, but before we get to those, any other member comments regarding business of the MACC? All right, well, you're not going to walk away quite so fast, so Carolyn, if you could come up.
Wow.
After 22 years, you're not walking away without something to remember us by.
Well, I know, when we were together on March 9, I did my little swan song then, but I am, I've been very much blessed to have, over the course of my time here, worked with so many talented and dedicated individuals, and that includes all of you around the table, includes all the folks sitting over there. And, had that not been the case, I wouldn't have stayed as long as I did. So I do want to thank you all. It's been my good fortune. Aha, very nice.
All right, read it to us, Steve.
Plaque reads, recognition of service presented to Steve Boltice, an acknowledgement of more than 22 years of outstanding dedication and commitment to the Macatawa Area Coordinating Council and the community, March 2018.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Thank you.
You've been integral to this, a driving force, and we're going to miss you a lot, but we certainly appreciate your years of service a great deal. So we wish you the best, whether you're hanging out at home or on Island Township. You make that call. You make that call. In a minute, there is cake there, and there's a card to sign for Steve. So if you haven't signed it, sign the card for Steve so we can take that with him. There is one more item that Carolyn wants to.
She's made by So Jen made this for you.
Ah.
And it has just a little
Well, all right.
There's got to be a Rhodes Scholar Award given out.
With my face,
Recipient. What?
with my face on there and everything, so. Well,
Very
thank you
nice.
very much, very nice. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. We are adjourned. Help yourself to cake. Do you guys? What's that?
All right.
All right.
We'll set this right out here.